live. Okay. Okay, first blender of the day. I had been talking for the last 5 minutes and I forgot to hit the live button. Go me. Okay, anyways, I'm gonna start over my spiel. So welcome, thank you for tuning in and watching my live gouache paint demonstration. I'm Joanna Hill behind J Hill Fine Art, and I'm going to be using a little bit of gouache paint today on a piece of New York cheesecake. So I'm starting out with a line drawing. I got the reference photo you can see up here. And I got that off of pixabay.com. They are a royalty-free photo reference website, so you can always go there if you're looking for inspiration. And I'm going to be using a couple different types of gouache today. If you're not familiar what gouache paint is an opaque watercolor. It is a extremely fast-drying medium. It dries with a matte finish, and you can dilute it with water and use it like a watercolor, but you can use it straight out of the tube. It has a very nice, thick, creamy consistency, and you can actually paint light on top of dark, which you can't do with watercolor. So it's just a very nice, versatile medium. It's pretty forgiving because you can actually reactivate it with water and keep working it. However, I'm going to be using a different type of gouache as an underpainting today. This is going to be, this is called acrylic gouache. This is from a brand called Holbein, and this has an acrylic polymer already mixed into the paint, so when it dries it does not reactivate with water. So it's really a nice option to use when you tend to work in layers like I do. Sometimes if I'm using just regular traditional gouache, if I overwork an area, I risk sort of lifting the layers underneath. So if I do a underpainting with acrylic gouache, I don't have to worry so much about that. So let's see. I'm also going to be using some micron pens. As you can see, I've already outlined my line drawing with some waterproof ink. I used the sepia. I've got a couple different sizes here, and I like to use these just as a illustrative look. I like to go for more of a comic book style when I paint with gouache. Just personal preference, you don't have to do that, but it is important that you use a waterproof ink. So I will go on top of my painting when I'm done and just sort of embellish areas that I want to sort of have it stand out with some line art. And then I'm also going to be using a variety of brushes. I've got all of these. They're just sort of random brushes that I have purchased from Michael's, from Hobby Lobby. Pretty much if I just see a brush that I think will work good for different paintings, I just pick it up. But I usually don't spend more than probably $5 to $8 on a brush. I go through them pretty quickly, so I don't spend a lot of money on them. So we've covered the acrylic gouache. The traditional gouaches I'm going to be using today is I'm going to be using Engram, another Holbein product. This is their traditional gouache. I'm also going to be using Turner Designer Gouache. And then I've got a couple different tubes of Winsor Newton Designer Gouache. So feel free to ask any questions in the chat box and let me know if you have questions about the gouache, about the project we're going to be working on, or if you have other art-related questions that you want some more information on. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I'll tell you what colors I'm going to be using, and yeah, so here we go. So I'm just going to start laying color out on my palette. When I first look at a reference photo, I look for what the local color is and what the local value of that color is. So right now I'm looking at the cherries, and I'm using the wine red from Holbein. I'm also going to put a little bit of carmine down, which is a warmer color. So the wine red's a cooler red, the carmine is a warmer red. And I'm also going to use a little bit of orange. And I'm gonna bring out a little sepia for my darks and Prussian blue for those shadow areas. I'm not gonna go straight for black. I don't usually use a lot of black in my paintings or drawings just because it is sort of a very flat shade. I prefer to have a little color in my shadows. So if I do use black, I will mix other colors into it because the human eye will just pick up those colors in those flat areas or in the shadow areas. Just makes it look a little bit more interesting. Okay, so everyone, thanks for joining. Hi Dee, how you doing? Okay, what do you mean by local color? So local color, I'm gonna grab my printout of, so the cherries are red. So the local color is red. So whatever the color of the particular object is, that is what we call the local color. So if I look at this green leaf, the majority color of that leaf is green. Even though there's several different varieties of green in there, the overall color is green. So I try to look at the overall value of that color, value meaning the lightness or the darkness, the measurement of that light or dark of that green, and I try to put that down as the first color that I put down. So I'm basically going to be making myself a sort of a paint by number. So what I'll do is I'm going to start with the cherries right here, and I'm going to actually sort of break it down a little bit. So I'm going to just look at my basic shapes. All these cherries are very circular, even though this is quite lumpy. There's a lot of dips and valleys in here. There's a lot of details. I'm going to imagine away all the details. I'm going to sort of visually take away the highlights and some of the little tiny bumps and lumps, and I'm just focusing on the main red parts and sort of the real deep crevices where it's real dark red. And those are the first two colors I'm going to be using. So I hope that answered your question. If you need more clarification, you just text away in there and I'll try and explain it in a different way. So I'm just going to use a round brush. This one is a number 8 Princeton from Velvet Touch. This one also came from Hobby Lobby. And let's see. So I'm going to start with my lightest value, which is this warmer red. And I'm going to start here, and I'm just going to fill in each area at a time. Now, one of the reasons I decided to also ink out my lines is because the paint is very opaque. If I paint over a line, I can still see it. If I just left it as graphite, I probably wouldn't be able to see it as well. And I'm going to paint the whole section with red. So I'm basically just building up. I'm giving myself a foundation to work on. And by the way, if there's any technical difficulties, I'm still trying to sort of work some kinks out and just kind of figure out how to do the live stream business. So if there's anything that needs to be changed, please just let me know in the comments. I'm not using a whole lot of water on my brush, just enough to make it fluid. It is pretty creamy when it comes out of the tube, but a little extra water just helps it go a little further. Probably could have used a larger brush, but that's okay. We'll make it work. Good rule of thumb is to always use the largest brush that you can control in a given space. Okay, so I know that there is more red over here too. If you look closely at the reference photo, there is a tiny little bit of red peeking through these leaves. I do want to be careful about not going over the lines because this is the acrylic gouache and it has that acrylic binder. It will not reactivate with water, so I can't lift it out in areas that I mess up on. So I'm trying to keep it where it's supposed to go. Okay. So I've just painted the local color of this whole top section of the cheesecake. So just red. So next I'm going to be looking at where are my darks, where are the darker areas like in between these valleys. So I'm going to mix something, I'm going to take my cooler red and I'm going to add a little bit of sepia and maybe just a teeny tiny little bit of Prussian blue. Something really dark here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look for areas where I see those nice heavy darks. It's a little bit scattered, so you have to sort of really study the reference photo. So this method that I'm also doing, I call this color blocking as well. You're just putting down basic shapes of color, creating a roadmap of where other colors are going to go later. I apologize if I get a little too quiet. I tend to concentrate on what I'm doing and I forget to talk. But feel free to ask any questions. Has anyone here used gouache paint before? What did you think about it? Where's everybody from? What sort of art mediums do you enjoy and what kind of artwork do you do? So this particular cherry underneath this mint leaf is pretty dark, so I'm just actually going to go right on top of it with this darker color. Okay. I'm going to mix a little bit of the wine red. I'm going to just raise that value just a pinch. And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of put a little darker values over here. Only work with pastel pencils and colored pencils from Wisconsin. That's great. I bet it's freezing up there right now. Pastel pencils, that I really got to hand it to you. That is I've seen some people just do amazing work with pastels. I could never get over the texture. It was always so chalky. I did it a few times in high school, art class, and it just, I couldn't stand the feeling. I couldn't do it. I can't do it. Color pencils all day long. Pastel, nope. Okay, so I'm taking some more of that wine red, and I'm going to paint between the real dark and the real light red that I put, just to get a nice transition color. And I'm just picking a particular point on the reference photo to start doing this. I'm always looking at my reference photo for where most of these colors are going to live. I don't want to get too detailed with the color blocking because I'm going to be doing most of the work with traditional gouache, not the acrylic gouache. So I'm just going to put some basic areas of shadow. Wind chill warnings. Ooh. Oh, you're allergic to pastel sticks, but not the pencils. That's interesting. Gosh, how did you find that out? What particular brand of pastel pencils do you like? Do you have a favorite? If you hear ticky-tacking out in the background, that's my dog trying to get in my room. I apologize. She can't stand to be without me. Okay, oop, there was a little shadow down here that I missed. Okay, so I think that's okay for right now. I'm going to just continue on color blocking some of the other areas. So I'm going to switch colors here. I'm going to fill in the leaves with some greens. So I've got a sap green that I'm going to use. And I'm also going to mix in maybe just a little bit of yellow. So I'll use sap green as my darker value. And then I'll use sap green with a little bit of regular, oop, that's the lemon yellow. Yeah, let's use lemon yellow. This is lemon yellow. We're going to use that one. And I'll make a little bit more of a lime green for the highlights. I'm going to switch brushes. I'm going to use, I've got a little filbert brush here. This is a filbert number 6. This one is also from Hobby Lobby. It's a Master's Touch. So I'm just dipping my brush into my water. I'm going to just go straight into this sap green. And I'm going to fill in the whole leaf. Carbothello and Pitt. I see a lot of people using the Carbothello and Pitt pastel pencils. They must be really good because I think every time I see someone's work in pastel, those are usually one of the brands that they've used. Do you ever watch Jason Morgan Wildlife YouTube channel? I think he uses those. He does some really cool stuff with pastels. Do you have a particular subject matter that you enjoy using? Or not using, I guess drawing? Okay, so I've just color blocked these two leaves. I'm going to add a little bit of my lemon yellow. And I'm just going to swipe in just a couple areas of some highlight. If you squint at your reference photo, you can take out a lot of the texture and you can kind of see real definite separations from one color to another value of the same color. So I'm looking at this leaf right here. If I squint, I can tell this whole backside of the leaf is a little darker, and then this is a little bit more in the light source. So that's where I'm just going to put my highlight. Still not worried about any sort of blending or detail work. I'm just getting color down in a generalized area where it's supposed to go. I'm going to use the lighter green for this guy up here. Portraits and still life, yep. I love still life. I don't think I could actually really do anything else. I've tried doing portraits before. Don't really enjoy them, so I don't tend to do as well with those. Definitely enjoy seeing what other people can do with them though. I'm going to switch to a slightly smaller brush. Yeah, I guess this one will work. This one's a number 2. This one is a flat number 2 from Trekell. It is a tack-on bristled brush. Oop, I went over the lines just a little bit. That's okay. When it dries, I can just paint right over it. It's the nice thing about paint is if you do make a mistake, it's just paint. Don't worry about it. You just paint right over it when it's dry. No stress. Now, if you paint out the lines and you get it into the background, then you're stuck making a background later. How do I decide which brush to use? Good question. So each kind of, I guess, shape of brush will get you a different application. So this flat brush, which is just more of a rectangle shape, has a flat edge. I would use something like this if I was, say, were to paint a box or something that has straight edges. That would help me a little bit better than a brush that has a rounded point, because that's going to get me more of a rounded brush stroke. But this one's so small that I can't even tell that it's leaving any sort of straight line imprint. But I prefer to use what's called a filbert brush, because, you know, once you sort of get used to using all these different brushes, you get to feel what works for you. So the filbert brush is more like a squoval. It's a square oval. So the one that I was using before was just a regular round brush, just your typical run-of-the-mill paintbrush that just comes to a point. I feel like for me, the filberts are a little bit easier to control, and I can make them come to a nice sharp point if I wanted to, not point as in like the round, but just a nice flat chisel, so I can get up really close to straight edges without a problem. And I can also get into round areas. So a lot of times I'll use a filbert brush for almost the entire painting, but it just really depends on what the shape is that I'm trying to paint into, and honestly just what is more comfortable in your hand. As far as brand, I don't really have any favorite brands of paint or paintbrushes. I really just kind of see what's on sale. I've been buying a lot of Hobby Lobby brushes lately, but in no particular favorite. Taklon bristle, I guess, would be the generic, synthetic bristle brush. But I try to use a brush size that I can control for the area. So always use the biggest brush you can use for a given area. So for this brush right here, or we'll say this leaf, I can use a larger brush, but not too large. This is another filbert here, and I can just squeeze that right in. But when you use a larger brush, you fill in much more area with paint faster than a small little tiny brush that would take you forever to fill something in. But you don't want to go too big, that you can't control it. So you just have to find a happy medium, and that just comes with practice and experience. I'm going to raise the medium or the value of this green just a pinch. That leaf is a little bit lighter. So I was, before I hit the live button, I thought I was live and I was talking about some of the materials that I was using, and I realized that I wasn't live and I was talking to no one. So if you missed it, the paper I'm using is hot pressed watercolor paper. It's 140 pound. It is the not Faber-Castell, Fabriano Artistico Aquarello hot pressed watercolor paper. It is archival and acid free, and it is 100% cotton. Does it matter if that's what you're using? Nope, it does not. But I do try to use quality paper and quality paint because I may intend to sell something that I'm working on. So I want my paintings and drawings to last. But I like the hot press for gouache painting because it's smoother, and I feel like the paint just sort of glides a little bit easier. Now, cold press, which is going to be more toothy of a paper, that's going to be able to let you do some really nice dry brushing techniques if you want to get that real those broken lines you get from dry brushing. It's going to pick up the tooth of the paper, and it's going to let you get some really nice effects. I can still do that with hot pressed, but I prefer hot pressed over cold pressed. Okay, so I've got the mint leaves color block. Just going to add some light here. Okay. Wash off my brush. Take a sip of coffee. Okay, so next I'm going to color block the cake portion in. So I'm looking at the jelly or whatever, the goopiness from the cherries. Because that is actually layered on top of the cake, that you can see in the reference photo, there are some areas that you can actually see through that jelly. It's a translucent liquid, if you can call it a liquid, viscous liquid. But anyways, it's going to be easier if you work in layers like I do. I tend to build up my paintings either when I'm drawing or I'm painting or whatever I'm doing. I tend to work from the most basic color and build on top of that. And because I can do colors on top of other colors, whether it's light or dark, dark on light, light on dark, easily, I can do some glazing where I can dilute the paint and have it sort of be translucent on top of another color. So it makes more sense for me to paint this sort of cream yellow, whitish cream yellow of the cake where the jelly is, and then later on paint the jelly on top of that. So I'm gonna just go ahead and paint this whole section in with sort of a cream color. So I've got, this one is beige from the acrylic gouache. And I'm just gonna put some on my palette. And it's pretty close to the color. There are some definite highlights and lowlights in that bread texture, but I'm not gonna be too worried about that just yet. We can add that in later. I am gonna switch to a larger brush. Here's that filbert brush I was talking to you about earlier. I'm just gonna put that right into my beige, and I'm gonna paint all of this. I'm not worried about losing my drawing lines because I can see it right through the paint. Now I'm not going to paint where the graham cracker breading is. I'm going to stay away from that, and I'll use a different color for that one. And so I have a water bottle here as well. I'm going to just spray my palette down just because my paint is getting a little dry. When you're using gouache paint or even acrylic paint, because they dry so fast, it's always nice to have a little misting bottle just to re-wet your palette. Pretty much any water-based medium, you want to have a water bottle handy to keep it wet, or the damp paper towel underneath your palette paper. So there's nothing like wasting paint when it dries out. See, I don't know if you can see what I'm doing. So you can have your brush very, very flat and thin, or you can have it nice and wide. So I just turn my brush in different directions to be able to fill areas quicker or with more precise application. Okay, so I've got that all filled in. Now we're going to use, I'm going to use a yellow ochre and maybe a little bit of the sepia for my graham cracker crust. So I'm intentionally going to make this darker than the local color that I see, because for texture, I like to do a lot of dry brushing and layer on dry brushing, which I'll show you here in a minute what that looks like, but it's going to be easier to dry brush lighter colors over the darker colors, I think. So I'm not going to make it too dark, but just a little darker. So I've got yellow ochre, a little bit of sepia, and it's a little bit more orangey, I think. So maybe I'll add in a little orange, maybe a little lemon yellow, maybe a little cream for the beige color, maybe more of the sepia. I think that looks okay. Okay, so now this is technically color blocked, minus the jelly that's dripping down. Okay. So what I'm going to do for that jelly portion, because I do want to have some sort of foundation for that, I'm going to do something lighter, I think, and a little bit translucent. So I'm going to try and match maybe a little bit of this beige color that we used and the red to make sort of something a little pinky. Now I'm going to use the wine red because it is a cooler red, so it looks a little bit more pinky, cooler pinky color than the warm red would. Maybe I'll actually use a little both reds. I want it cool, but I don't want it too cool, and I want it warm, but not too warm. And I don't want it too red either. I want a nice, happy medium between this beige and that pinky color. Like a Pepto-Bismol color, I guess you could call it. Now I'm going to kind of just blob this on a little sloppily because it is translucent in some areas. So I'm just going to just quickly glaze over that. I'm going to make it a little bit more watery. If you add more water, you're going to get more of a wash consistency than an opaque consistency. Okay, so this just gives us a place to start. So don't ever overthink color blocking. Even if you don't think it's quite the right color, it's just paint. We're going to be adding lots of colors on top of this. Okay. Do you have to wait for it to dry, or can you can paint wet on wet? You absolutely can. Matter of fact, if you were to be painting, say, a sky and you wanted a nice seamless blend, it is very difficult to blend seamlessly with gouache because it dries so incredibly fast. I've actually tried adding different mediums like gloss medium, slow dry medium, everything I could think of that I had in my art room I've tried and have failed, except for one product, which was this Winsor Newton blending medium for watercolor. This worked amazingly. It still dries fast, but if you can work quick, it blended really well. So I haven't really gotten a chance to use it. I don't really do a lot of landscape type stuff, but or larger images to where I would need to blend large areas. So I haven't really gotten a chance to play with it much, but I just did a little test piece and I really liked that it worked well. So I would recommend this. Again, this is the Winsor Newton blending medium for watercolor. So give that a try. Okay, let's see. So I'm going to switch out my palette because I'm going to be using traditional gouache now. So I want to get rid of my acrylic gouache. Get a new sheet of palette paper. I'm going to put these back in the box real quick. so so now we get to decide which part of the painting we want to work on. So I find it's a lot easier for me if I go one section at a time, and it helps me to stay organized that way. And if I jump around the painting too much, I tend to get overwhelmed or I forget what I was doing. So it's easier for me to just kind of take one, 1 inch by 1 inch section, or one, maybe we'll focus on, these leaves of the mint leaves, and we'll call that one section. Or if you wanted to work on, the bread section, that would be one section. So try to organize your work the best you can. Otherwise, it's so easy to get overwhelmed. And sometimes if you have all your areas of your painting in different, progressing in different manners, sometimes you can make it look really sort of muddy, and then you tend to lose the actual drawing underneath. So another reason why I like to organize my work. So let's go ahead and let's work on the leaves here. I'm going to start with the one in the closer to us. So I'm going to just kind of look at the colors. I definitely know I'm going to be using some greens. There's some bluish greens in there, as well as some yellowish greens. So that tells me I need yellow, blue, and green. And I'm just going to find some. Now, there are areas of intensity and areas where the color is not so intense. So to knock back intensity of a color, you want to mix it with gray. Or if you have a color that already has gray in it, like this one is ash green from Holbein, I could use that too to knock back the intensity. But I'm going to use both on my palette. I'm going to use gray and the ash green just in case I may want to choose one or the other. This one's just a medium gray. This one's neutral gray 5 from Turner. And let's see, I'm going to use a warm yellow. This one, let's see, lemon yellow. Well, I thought I had a warmer yellow, but I think Azo yellow is just going to have to be the ticket. It's not as warm as I would like, but that's okay. And I'm also going to use Hooker's green. This is the green that I have in the traditional gouache. It is quite dark, but I can lighten that up using the white. I'm not too worried about getting colors absolutely perfect. What I want to do and get as perfect as I can are the values of the colors, or the values of that particular form, because that's what's really going to make and break your picture. If your lighting is off, it doesn't matter about the colors. Your picture's just going to look off if your shadows are in the wrong spot. Although try to get your colors in the ballpark at least. Okay, let's see. Got a damp brush, and I'm going to start on this leaf right here, and I'm going to zoom in on my reference photo. If you have your reference photo on your phone, it's really helpful to zoom in. You can get a lot more detail that way. So I'm going to mix a little bit of my yellow with my Hooker's green. And I could probably even zoom in on the camera too. There we go. Okay, so I've got some darker greens back here where I've already put some dark green. So I'm being very gentle with my brush strokes, and I'm going from the back to the front where it's darker in the back and it gets lighter towards the front. I'm gonna add in some lighter green, a little bit of white, a little bit of yellow, a little bit of that hooker's green. So it's easier to imagine away all those veins in the leaf and imagine it as one gradient of color. Now we're getting a little bit into the mid-tone greens. So anytime you have a three-dimensional object, you're going to have three values. You're going to have a shadow, a highlight, and a mid-tone. So usually if your object is feeling a little flat, you may be missing one of those values, or the distance or the strength of your highlight comparing to your shadow isn't strong enough. They're too close to the mid-tone, and that tends to make it look flat. So always take a step back from your work and check the contrast. Okay, so I still haven't done much detail work on this, but now that I have a layer of traditional gouache, what I can do to sort of blend these areas of color together is I can take a damp brush and just sort of, I'm bouncing the tip of my brush on there, and it's just enough pressure and dampness that it's sort of reactivating that paint, and it's just sort of gently blurring them together. Now, I'm not going to be able to get a perfect blend because of the characteristic of this paint, because gouache paint has chalk in it. That's what gives it that natural matte texture and that chalky finish. So you're not really going to be able to blend it and make it look super smooth like oil painting would. But you can, if you just keep working it and have a lot of patience, you can do okay. Okay, so at this point, after it's dry, I could go in and do some line work, but as I'm looking at my reference photo and comparing, I think my highlights could be a little bit stronger. So I'm just gonna go back in, I'm gonna grab a little bit more yellow, a little bit of white, and a little bit more of that green. Now what I can do is start zooming in on the leaf and some of these larger masses of the raised texture of the leaf. I can kind of just translate that as little blobs. And I could start painting some of the highlights that live on top of those. And it kind of just looks like a little bit of a mess currently, but I'm suggesting the start of that texture. I do need to go down in value as it gets closer to the back. Okay, I'm gonna switch to my smaller brush because I want a little bit more control. I'm gonna get the bristles wet. I'm gonna blot that off on my towel. And I'm actually gonna reactivate like I did when I was blending the whole leaf. I wanna blend that line where those little highlight blobs I put, where they meet the leaf. I'm just gonna bounce the bristles very, very carefully. I don't want to brush stroke. I don't want to swipe. I don't want to smear anything. I just want to soften. And this ensures that those highlights are going to stay put where I put them, but they sort of have soft edges and they blend a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit more highlights to the back side of the leaf, so not too strong of a highlight, but something just a tad lighter, or sorry, a tad darker than what we were using. And I'm also looking at the pattern of the leaf. I'm always looking for the movement of the pattern, so it tends to sort of go in a downward motion or a pattern that's sort of going downwards. So I want to sort of try to fake the texture best I can to make it look like it's going downward. I'm going to paint in that direction. You always want to paint in the direction of the movement of the object, or whatever the texture of the object is. The brush strokes going in the direction that it's supposed to will help create the form. It's going to make it look more three-dimensional. Okay, so I think I'm happy with that. And I'm going to do the same process to the other leaves. Now, keep in mind that your values are going to change from leaf to leaf, so watch out for that. So I'm going to go ahead and paint in the stem. That's kind of hiding back there. There's a tiny little highlight just on the very top of that, so I'm just going to gently place a little line to represent the highlight. And there's even maybe a little highlight there. I'm not going to get too far into details right now because we're still very much in the beginning stages. Okay, so this leaf, we've got a little bit of highlights coming from the inside, so it's kind of going out. It's going in this direction. I want that to be a little bit more yellow. And we've got some mid-tone greens right here. I'm just going to add in a little bit of white to my green, add some highlights. There's some reflective light happening here and also sort of in here. Again, I'm just sort of bouncing the bristles. And with a damp brush, I'm just going to very gently soften those edges again. Okay, excuse me for 1 second. I'm going to turn the fan on in here. It is really hot. Okay. That computer of mine, when it starts to just work, it just warms up this room and it's just boiling. Okay, I'm going to move to the leaf down below here. And I'm going to mix a little bit of a mid-tone green, not too dark, not too light, somewhere in the middle. I've got a nice bright highlight right up here on the towards the center of that mint leaf. So I'm going to grab some of my white, some of my green, some more of my lemon yellow. And then soften. And it's kind of hard to see that little tiny leaf right in the center. So I might just get a teeny tiny little detail brush and just kind of paint him in. I'm not entirely sure where his lights and his darks are, but we'll just have to make it up. Definitely is in the lighter part of that whole area. He does need a little bit of a shadow. Make him stand out a little. Okay, so the leaf right here in the reference photo, it almost seems like a little flat against these two because the values are very close. I'm gonna actually add a little gray. I'm gonna add a little bit of the regular gray and the ash green to my green. And I'm gonna desaturate the intensity of the red because I want him to look like he's being pushed back a little bit into the picture. So it actually looks like it's sort of behind the two that are in front of it. And I'm going to move into a little bit more of the mid-tone green. Here we go. And it needs a little bit of a highlight just on the edge. Or towards the tip here. Again, taking my damp brush and I'm just gently stippling or bouncing my brush, getting just enough brush pressure. Goodness, I can't talk today. Brush pressure just to smudge it just a little bit, just to soften. Okay, think he needs a little bit more of a highlight and a little bit more yellow, a little bit more white. I'm going to add a little bit more green because I still don't want it too saturated. I want to control the saturation of the color, the intensity of the color. Man, there is a noisy cricket right outside of my window. I don't know if y'all can hear that. I don't know what the gossip is, but he definitely has something to say. Okay. So I'm thinking I like how those look. I'm gonna leave them alone for now, and I'm gonna work on the back mint one. I'm going to do the same process. So I'm going to go with this bottom leaf that's in the back. So because he's also further into the background of the cheesecake, I am going to put some gray in there so I can set him a little bit further behind. A little bit too much gray. A little bit more green, a little bit more yellow. And that side's got a little bit more of highlight. It's catching a little bit more of the light source, so it's going to be a little bit more intense with color, a little bit lighter in value. Oh, thanks so much for watching, Dee. Hope to catch you next time. I'll probably have a part 2 of this video. I don't know how much I'm going to get done this evening, but I'll definitely continue working on it. So join me again. So thank you. Okay. All right, there's a little bit of highlight right down here on the bottom of this leaf. All right, I'm gonna leave him alone and I'm gonna work on this one right here. Now this one's got a lot of strong shapes too. You can see where the veins of the leaf definitely separate. It's got some strong contrast. So I'm going to be focusing on the larger shapes. So I'm going to focus on the highlighted area first. So I'm going to grab a little bit of white, mix that in with my lighter green that I had there. And it's sort of in a funky shape. A little bit of water. I'm always looking at shapes of things, whether it's if I'm trying to figure out where to put colors, it's easier to try to find groupings of texture and sort of imagine them into some sort of shape, almost like you're kind of looking at clouds and imagining them to be something. You know, you're sort of letting your imagination create a shape. And if you can do that, it's much easier to paint or draw that particular shape than it is just sort of coming up with it out of your head. Always make sure that you're actually looking at your reference photo. You can't paint what you can't see. I'm gonna add a little bit more yellow to my palette. How do you determine how much of each color to blend to get the effect you are looking for? So that's a good question too. So first, a lot of, I would say, educated guessing on color picking comes with experience by just painting or drawing or coloring or just doing. You're going to get familiar with the paints you have, and you're going to sort of build memory as to what those colors look like, and you're going to remember combinations that you've used. Sometimes if you create color charts, matter of fact, I tell all of my students, when you have a new product that you use or that you've purchased, make a color swatch chart, because one, you're going to be able to see what the color looks like when it's on paper, and you're going to be able to visually remember that. It's going to be ingrained in your head somewhere, and sometimes it'll just come to you and you'll be like, oh, I remember this color. I've seen this color, I have this color, or I know how to make it. So having almost making yourself recipe cards. And depending on the effect that you want, different color combinations are going to achieve that. For example, I painted a painting of grapes in color pencil. And if you see grapes, or at least the reference that I worked from, the grapes seem to be as if they were glowing. So I needed to figure out how could I layer my color, or what combinations did I need to use to make it look like it was glowing. So what I did was I did an underpainting in orange, and then I layered my reds and pinks and maroons on top of that. And because the medium I was using, the color pencil, they are somewhat translucent, those layers will work together and you can see layers underneath come through to the top, giving you that effect. So depending on what you're painting or drawing and the medium, there you have to learn how to use, you have to strengthen your technical skills, and also knowing color theory and how to manipulate color. That's really going to help you, decide what to use and how to do it. And that just really comes with practice, experience, observing, and just studying your reference, and just having fun with the medium. So the more you do that, the more comfortable you're going to be, and the more confident you're going to be, to actually achieve what you want it. And don't be upset with yourself if you don't know how to do something. Like, I've been doing artwork for my entire life. I'm 36. I've been doing it since, I was, in middle school. And, I still don't know it all, but I'm constantly reading books. I'm always watching other artists and trying to listen to what they have to say, what their process is, and see if I can adopt any of those techniques. And that has helped me a lot. And I just practiced, I put them into practice. I find things I enjoy drawing and painting, and I always have something on my easel. So even if I'm not doing a commission or something, I have something going, so my hand is always in art. So don't get, taking breaks are good and necessary, but you don't want to let too much time go by without doing something creative, because you want to build that skill. And it is a skill. You don't have to have a natural talent to do art. Sometimes it's easier for people than others, but I don't necessarily think that you have to have a natural talent to do it. It is a skill. It's very much a skill. Tim, I hope that answered your question. I have a article that I wrote for Color Pencil magazine back in 2020. It was in their September issue. And I wrote an article on just some words of wisdom. I had just kind of decided to do some creative writing one day. And it's on my website. It's called Words of Wisdom. And I just have a whole bunch of random little tips and tricks that I've picked up along the way. And my first one is always have a sketchbook. Always bring it with you somewhere. I don't always do that, I confess. But I think it's really important to have something to work in that you can keep practicing. Even if it looks like garbage, you don't have to show it to anybody. But as long as you are practicing your drawing skills or painting skills, whatever it is that you want to do, it's so important. And drawing from life. I loved it when we used to go to little diners and I would just draw the salt shaker on the table. I really need to go back and do that more often. I've gotten out of the habit, but it's very important to do. James Gurney, if you are not familiar with him, he authored Dinotopia, and he did all the artwork in it. He does have a YouTube channel. I've got a couple of his books that he's written on color theory. Amazing books, amazing artist. Definitely has helped me a lot with understanding lighting and texture and technique of different painting methods. But anyways, in his book, he mentions that if you have one sketchbook of just drawing from life, and then one sketchbook drawing from imagination, eventually, if you keep at it long enough, the two will start getting better and better, because one will feed into the other and the other will feed into the other subconsciously. So he does a lot of paintings and drawings of dinosaurs, and you can't exactly go and observe those from life. So, he painted from life with other things, and he actually recreates with models and stuff, little dioramas and stuff. But anyways, I thought that was just a really interesting way to think about sketchbooks. Because I'll be honest, I'm kind of terrified to draw on a sketchbook sometimes, because I don't like to make mistakes, or I feel like everything has to be a masterpiece, and it becomes really stressful. But I just got to get out of the habit and just do it. Just do the work. Don't think about it, just do it. All right, I think I am done with the leaves for the moment. So they're a little bit more color blocked than, they are color blocked, but I'm starting to build up that detail. So I'm going to kind of go over to maybe another portion of the painting and start there. Let me show you a little bit of dry brushing technique. So I'm actually going to zoom back out, and I want to maybe do a little bit of texture work on the bread, just so you can see how I do some texture. It's very bready, and you can use these same techniques for doing pretty much anything with texture. So I'm looking at the reference photo, and I'm kind of observing how many different values are in that crumb layer and how many different colors. So we've got some warm browns, we've got dark sepia browns, we've got, you know, even a little like honey caramel colors. So I'm gonna have just a couple different colors on my palette, and we'll start from there. Okay, I'm gonna use a little raw umber. And let's see. I'm gonna use a little yellow ochre. And oh, I do have a permanent yellow deep, the darker purple or darker yellow that I was looking for earlier, or warmer yellow. And let's see, I'm gonna be using some white, and what else can I use? I'm actually gonna use a little magenta. Maybe. I see some cool tones in some of those darker areas. So, okay. Now it doesn't really matter if you start dark to light, light to dark. And I'm gonna use a larger brush. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start with sort of these darker areas of texture. So I'm gonna get a little bit of my raw umber. You know, I'm gonna grab a little bit of orange too. Brilliant Orange, this one is called. I'm gonna mix that in with my raw umber. Now I'm gonna dry brush this. So I haven't added any water to my brush, and I'm just wanting to let it drag sort of. I don't want a lot of pressure, but I want it to drag across and sort of just pick up just the top of the paper tooth. So just very, very gently. I don't know if you can see that. It looks like it's a broken line. And this is called scumbling, where you're just sort of scrubbing. Another reason why I tend to go through a lot of brushes, because I do this a lot. And you can see areas where the paint has sort of built up closer together. So it's starting to sort of form those little pockets of darker texture that you see in the crumbs. Okay, now we're getting a little bit onto the left side. There's not a whole lot of this darker color. Add a little bit of gray, a little bit of yellow ochre, a little bit of yellow deep, a little bit of orange, so I am starting with a darker value, because I want my last few layers to be more of the highlights. That way the darker texture is sort of sandwiched between the base layer and the top texture layers. Okay, let's see. What else can we put in here? I'm going to mix a little bit of this magenta in with my raw umber. And I'm going to kind of be very gentle with this. I don't want a lot of magenta anywhere. I like using magenta in shadow colors because it really just sets some of that shadow right in there. It's a good color for shadows. Add a little bit of water to this, just a teeny tiny bit. All right, I'm actually going to switch brushes because I want a round brush because I'm going to do a little bit more like of a stippling, scumbling effect, and I think I can get a better pattern going with that brush instead of the filbert. Oh, let's see here. We'll use this guy. Okay, I'm going with some yellow ochre, some yellow deep, a little bit of water, and I'm just holding my brush straight up and down, and I'm just stippling it. So I'm using the round brush because I want more of a round stamp, like you're stamping it. It has more of a round shape to it. You can see how that looks. It looks a little bit more rounder, like more like crumbs. But it's working together with the layers underneath it. So it looks like the crumbs are layered on top of each other. And doing this in different colors, different values, that's just going to add to the depth of your painting. And this also ruins your brushes. I'm gonna add a little bit more gray to my yellow here. I'm actually gonna add a pinch of the magenta to it. It's very easy to overdo this too. So I am squinting my eyes because I want to see if there's any large shapes of different values add a little bit more orange, a little bit of the raw umber. So I'm going back and forth between dark and light values, and I'm just layering on almost like you're sponge painting. But I'm just trying to pay attention to the reference photo on where different areas of color, different areas that are darker or lighter. It's not going to be perfect, but I can get it close. All right, I'm going to clean my brush off, and I'm going to just look at different areas of that same breadcrumb. It does seem like it's more textured towards the right side than it does to the left. I mean, it's all textured, but I'm looking for areas that maybe look more blurry. So that's going to help balance areas where it's too textured. So I'm just going to take my damp brush and just go and soften areas where I think need to be softened. And I'm going to wipe off my brush as I move around because I don't want to contaminate other areas with paint color that I pick up on my brush. Hi, Chris. You actually going to get your paints out for once and use them? Okay. I'm just trying to clean up some of my edges here. I'm not too happy with this just yet. I think we can work on this some more, bring out some of those more highlights, but I think as a color blocked texture, if you will, I think this is a good start. You definitely want to take time on your paintings. If you are rushing through things and you're completing your artwork in, like an hour, depending on what it is, like, you should really take a lot longer on your artwork. The more time you spend, the better it's going to look like. And I think spending a lot of time on the beginning stages like we are, that's going to help with, when you finally get to the icing on the cake details, you're not going to end up having to go back and rework a section because you've already spent the time there. Okay, let's see. I'm going to switch brushes again. I'm going to actually get out this pretty crummy looking craft brush that I found on the floor today. I want something with a little bit more of a messed up bristle. Sometimes those old brushes, they just do something for your painting. We'll see if it's going to do something for me today. Add a little bit of white, a little bit more orange. I'm going to blot some of the liquid off. Oh, you're working tonight, Uncle Chris? Well, hopefully it's a non-eventful evening. Or maybe you want an eventful evening. I don't know. And Nope, you do not need to let things dry first. Well, I guess it really depends on what you're doing. You can paint wet into wet with gouache, but honestly, I think it's hard to paint wet into wet with gouache because it just dries so incredibly fast that you don't really get a chance to paint wet into wet. It just dries before you can mix your next color. So a lot of this is already dry by the time I'm putting my next layer on. But I don't know if you can see this, but those little highlight spots that I put, I'm actually changing colors now, and I'm just laying color beside those just to give some more interest to some of the texture I just laid down. I don't want to cover it, I just want to add to it. So my method is working large to small. So large, we color blocked. Working a little bit smaller, we added more of that stippling and scumbling texture, and now we're going in even smaller with teeny tiny dots. And you can go sort of back and forth as you need to adjust different areas. And I want to get some texture right along this line where it sits onto the surface, because cheesecake crust does not have a very straight line. It's a very irregular, bumpy crust. You're not doing nothing, you're trolling on my art video. A lot of the same technique I also use with colored pencil, where I'll work from large areas of color and value to the next largest areas of color and value, and then smaller and smaller until I'm at that point where I can put those tiny little details, those little highlights, the icing on the cake parts that we just want to instantly jump to. It's so easy to jump to doing the details because those are the best part, but you really just got to slow down and build up to that. Otherwise your artwork's not going to look convincing. Spend a lot of time on fundamentals. You know, if you don't have an accurate drawing, that also can make it harder to make your paintings on top of the drawings look well. All right, I'm just gonna spray my palette again. It makes a little bit of magenta. I'm gonna go back to a darker value. So mixing magenta with my raw umber. And you know what? I think I'm actually going to add a little bit of something even a little darker. I might even grab my Prussian blue. Let's see. So I got a little bit of Prussian blue, which is really dark. I'm going to mix that in with the raw umber and the magenta just to kind of get some really nice contrast. You don't want to use a lot of Prussian blue. It is quite strong. Just enough to deepen it. A little bit more magenta. All right, we'll see how that looks. one of the interesting characteristics about gouache is that dark colors tend to dry in a lighter value, and lighter colors will dry in a darker value. I think that has a lot to do with how the light reflects, because it's such a matte medium. But sometimes that can be really frustrating because, you know, you thought you had your contrast correct and a good color down, and then it just lightens up on you. But that's okay. I have learned to be a little bit flexible with this paint. You really got to. It really has a mind of its own. So I learned just not to fight it, just let it do its thing. You can always go back and readjust your values. Adding a little bit more gray to that dark value. Oh, that's a little too dark still, I think. A little too dark. Add in a little bit of yellow ochre. A little bit of yellow deep. A little bit of orange. To have a nice, pretty mud color. So all I'm doing is just sort of little tiny dit dots, little scribbles, little lines, anything to just sort of start creating texture. All texture is just a series of lines, dots, squiggles, dashes, random shapes. But they vary in shape. So you have small ones, large ones, big ones. You know, I'm gonna add, let's see, I'm gonna actually get a little bit of red out. I'm gonna use a warm red. This one is Naphthol red from M. Graham. I'm just adding that into that brownish mud color just to warm it up. I tend to think about color temperature as I work as well, whether my color is cooler or warmer. The human eye will pick up warm colors before it will pick up cooler colors. So if you want something that you want to jump out or appear like it's brighter, you want to use warmer colors. And if you want something to look like it's more in shadow or further into the background, you want to use cooler toned colors. I'm just going back and forth, overlapping one color over the other. I'm just going to keep working this section until I like how it looks, until I start building up that value and the depth. And I'm always looking at my reference photo. I'm always staring at that probably more than I'm actually painting, because I want to know what it is that I'm trying to paint. All right, I think my palette's getting a little bit too muddy here. Get a little bit more orange. For some reason my red was super runny. Sometimes you get tubes of paint and it just is nothing but liquid when it comes out. It's really annoying. All right, moving on. I'm gonna go back into my red, add a little bit of orange, tiniest little bit of gray. Maybe a little more gray. And a little bit of white. And some yellow. Maybe a little more yellow. So, Chris, if you're still watching, are you working on your book binding still? Do you have any new projects you're working on? All right, just cleaning my brush off. I'm gonna go in with a damp brush again, and I'm just gonna try and soften areas where I think it's a little bit too, this is a terrible brush to do that with. Let me change brushes. I'm gonna soften areas of texture where I think it's a little bit too textured. And the way I do this, I do the same thing. I kind of just skip around. I'm just bouncing the bristles on the paper. I'm not swiping. I want to just soften, and with a damp brush, it's enough liquid to reactivate the paint. But I'm moving in just a random pattern. Sometimes it helps to turn your brush. I'm using that filbert brush, so it's sort of that swivel shape. So if I turn the brush in different directions, it'll give me a different application, different pattern. Okay, this is coming along. So we've been at this for about 2 hours. There's definitely no way we're going to be able to finish this project tonight, so there will most likely be a part 2 and a part 3 to this. So I'm going to just go on for a little bit longer. I'm going to keep working the crust, and once I'm done with the crust, I think we'll call it a night. And I will schedule another paint along, and that'll also give you some time to work on your own painting if you're following along with me. and we'll continue working on it later. But stay tuned for updates. Okay, I want a little bit more of this. I keep seeing this sort of reddish, orangey reddish tone that I can't seem to get. You know, I'm just gonna go in with straight orange and red and see what that looks like. It's probably gonna be way too strong. Yeah, that's whew, that's hot. Yeah, I don't like that. Sometimes you just gotta try things, and if it doesn't work, just paint over it. You're not married to it. I want some more of this magenta. Let's see what I do with that. Mixing a little bit of magenta with the warm red and the orange. Warm red and the orange. A little bit more magenta. And I'm putting it in areas where I see some of those darker values. Sort of using that as a transition color from dark into a lighter. Just adding little bits of texture here. Okay, I'm gonna go with a different brush. Go back to my crummy craft brush that I found on the floor. Seemed to work pretty good. Now I gotta remember what pile of paint I was working from. Red, orange, magenta. If your paint is too liquidy, just rest your brush on your paper towel and it will soak up a lot of the excess moisture. Starting to look really crumbly. Thanks, Eddie. That's the goal. Okay, I'm going back into some raw umber. Gonna wipe off some of the moisture on there and just go back in. Just gonna add some more darker values. Add a little bit more gray. Get some more neutral values, neutral tones in here. Okay, I'm just gonna go in and with a damp brush again, and I'm just gonna soften some more areas. It's always just a constant back and forth of adding texture, softening, adding texture, softening, switching up colors, until when you soften them, they tend to blend in with the color next to it. So you sort of start creating more and more colors as you lay the same colors down in different ratios, and it sort of starts to paint itself in a way. Very easy to overdo it, so you just got to be careful. You don't want to cover up areas that you do like, or areas that you worked really hard on to get. Like this area right here has a little too much red from that magenta I added, so I'm just gonna soften that till it starts to blend in with what's already on there. That's one thing I like about this paint. It's just very forgiving. It's a very forgiving paint. So I'm starting to lose highlights now, so I need to go in and work on putting some more lighter values in. And some of these darker spots just need to get worked out a little bit. They're a little too stark. Alright, so I'm going to take some white, mix it in with, we'll just find something muddy on the palette, something a little more on the yellow side. Now when you're adding more highlights, you do want to be conscious about where most of the highlights are hitting. You know, even though that whole front side is in the light source, there's still some, ins and outs of the form of that bread texture. So you do have to sort of, like, some areas are hitting highlights more so than other areas. So you do need to be a little conscious about that. Now, if I were to just use this highlight all the way across, that would sort of flatten it out. It would make it look weird. So I'm sort of just concentrating it on areas where I see highlights. So I'm going to actually take the same mixture. I'm going to add a little bit of my neutral gray, because right between the top and where it meets the cake part, there's a little bit of a sort of a grayed out blur. I'll show you in a second. You can see what I mean. Just more of a gray toned cream color. because it's not a solid line. It's baked into the bread, so we want it to be sort of a staggered line. And I'm just going to blur that out a little bit, soften it. That'll give us a nice transition to start working on the cake part. Just dry brushing just a little bit, just kind of glazing on a little bit of orange tone. Sometimes it's easier to think of this as painting a abstract painting than actually what it is. You know, I think your mind frees up a little bit when you're just painting shapes and colors that mean absolutely nothing. Well, almost nothing. Okay, I'm going to go in with a smaller brush and I'm going to soften some areas and make them look a little bit more round. Less edgy, because this is more round bread crumbles than whatever it is I have going on here. Here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can kind of see what I'm doing. That's a little dark. Let me see if I can lighten that up. Oh, maybe not. I messed with my camera settings real quick. There we go. A little bit brighter for you. So I'm just taking areas where I think that they're really sharp and don't need to be, and I'm just smudging them. It's like performing surgery on your artwork. I think personally this is sort of the fun part, because you just end up creating all these colors and just fun little things just happen. It's very tedious, but good artwork is very tedious. Oh, I apologize. I think my camera just froze. Yeah, it sure did. Let me see if I can fix that. Nope. My camera just died. That's why I'm not on there. I apologize. Well, I think I will take that as my cue to stop at this point for the evening. And we will pick this up on another day. I'm going to shoot for a date next week. And I will post which day I'm going to be back on the live stream on my website, on Instagram, Facebook. And if you are subscribed to my newsletter, you can go to www.jhillfineart.com, and there should be a little pop-up on the home screen. You can type your information in there, and you can get all the information that I send out monthly. It's got information about workshops and events that I'm having, and I'll definitely be sending an email out for the next live stream. So you can find that information out that way, or you could just check back in with the website and I'll update that as well. So I hope you learned a lot this evening. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me, jhillfineart.com, or sorry, jhillfineart@gmail.com. And I'll see you guys next time. So thanks for watching.